Hi, everyone, and welcome to this IFEC podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by a co-host, a new co-host on the show, and a guest, an esteemed, dare I say it, research colleague. First of all, Kabir, you're joining us today as a co-host. You're helping us at IFEC with a couple of research projects in the role of research assistants. We're delighted to be working with you, and I'm really happy to have you here. How about you say a few words to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Matt. Pleasure's all mine to be associated with IFEC. The people at the organization are amazing. I've had chats with everyone so far. But a bit about myself, sports coaching graduate from bachelor's and master's. Really passionate about esports. I think I spend a lot of my time playing them. Don't think my parents are too happy about that. But luckily now I can tell them that it's hopefully going to be a career path for me going down the line.
Excellent. Cool. Thanks for that. Kabir, do you want to introduce our guest?
Yeah, well, the pleasure is all mine to introduce Tobias Scholz, esteemed academic, so one of the first people to talk about esports, and now running one of the biggest esports research networks in the world, adequately called Esports Research Network as well. And yeah, today we're going to talk to him about his journey in academia, his research interests, and what he thinks about the esport industry from past, present, and to the future.
Fantastic. Over to you, Tobias. Would you like to give us the formal introduction? Dr. Tobias Scholz, over to you.
Yeah. Welcome and hello, everybody. And thank you for the invitation and the kind words. Always a pleasure to hear them, that we are the biggest network, and it's always great. And yeah, my short story is a long story, but I try to keep it short. I'm in esports for over 20 years, so I'm one of this first generation, but I'm also one of the first generation researcher in that. So my research ranges back to 2009. But yeah, in general, the idea is I was too bad in playing games, so I became a journalist. That didn't work out, so I became a researcher. And it seems to work out, I think.
Fantastic. Well, I would say it's definitely worked out. Kabir and I were, in preparation for this podcast, we were talking about how we're both huge fans, dare I say it, fanboys of you and your work. And just off the top of my head, a few things that you've certainly helped me with in terms of clarifying my thoughts around what is esports, that it's not just sport, it's a mixture of entertainment, media, culture, technology. It's all a sort of melting pot of those ideas and different qualities of each of them. I remember a paper you wrote on sportification about how over 400 sports clubs have tried to make it in esports, and by and large generally failed or flamed out pretty quickly. This idea of esports as a Wild West, I generally associate you with that idea. You might say it's not your own, but I certainly associate your writing on it, with that idea, and numerous other things. I think today we're going to delve into a few of those topics, but yeah, we could go a little bit further into your backstory. So, I mean, when did gaming and esports appear in your life, on your radar?
Yeah, so gaming, I would say before, it's like my first real memory, somewhat, playing the game Decathlon, which was like an Olympic game. I have the vivid feeling that I was pushing some buttons, and my parents said that was like with 2 years, something around that. And since then, so my father was, a tech guy. So he brought all the technology home. I have an older brother, which was helpful as well. So gaming was always a part of my life. And interestingly, I was in an environment where we had a lot of Counter-Strike players. We recently tried to memorize how many Counter-Strike players we had in class, like in the high school class. And from 30 or 40 boys, we had 15 Counter-Strike players. And that was like in 1999 and 2000. So even the early times. And yeah, so that was the part where gaming was always part of my life. And interestingly, because I was a handball player at that time, I had time. because I had no time for anything else. So after training, the only thing I was able to do was playing some video games. So that helped me a lot. And that was something where all started. And then the handball part didn't work out. So I had more time and switched to video games even further.
Incredible. I didn't know that. So already I'm learning today. That is, in some ways, and I don't mean to hijack this, kind of exactly the same. I think my older brother played when I was younger. I used to sit there and watch him play. He used to turn the blood settings to green on most games so that I wouldn't get too scarred. And also, in between training sessions when I was trying to make it as a basketball player, I think we should play Star Wars Battlefront 2. That was like the big one. Yeah, amazing. Okay, there's an overlap already. And then academia came in at some point. So, I mean, you have a phenomenal career in research. You have a doctor title. So academia took a foothold at some point?
Yeah, so also for backstory, my father is a professor. So that was a big influence. I tried to not go into academia as being a rebel. But in the end, I realized I like it. I like it a lot. And that was the part where, okay, let's go that path. I had the privilege that I have an environment here in Siegen that allowed me to research some hobby stuff at that point. So they said, okay, do your normal PhD. That's your main focus, but you can do other research. And that helped me, or that allowed me to do research on esports relatively early, where I was able to use my connections in esports and all. And after my PhD, same time, esports grow a lot more. I was also the idea here at Siegen, if you have your PhD and you go to something else, you have to do a completely different field. And at that point, it was, okay, what can I do? Let's do esports, let's delve in. And that was the part where, yeah, I had a chance to do a good special issue, to get a book deal and all. That led to the idea of the Esports Research Network, where I found interesting people and committed people. And that was quite helpful, especially for the beginning. So it was something that needed time, needed development. And that was something where, yes, academia is slow. We all know that. It's still slow, but we are now at the point where we can say it's at least a niche research topic. It's not a niche industry, by far not, but we are lagging behind. And so that was something where it is now able to create an academic career on esports. And that is something I'm quite happy about, that we are at that point nowadays.
Brilliant. What were your early topics, may I ask? So undergraduate, master's, PhD in what topics?
So my master thesis was on cultural diversity in video game developer teams.
Oh, okay. Incredible.
That was the compromise with my master supervisor that said, you cannot talk about the teams that play the game, but you can talk about the teams that develop it. So that was quite interesting. And yeah, my PhD thesis was on big data and human resource management. So again, something where a lot of technology is in there. And that's the part where both of those worlds now collide in esports.
Incredible. So it was from the first day. It was there. Video games and esports was always around. Brilliant. Kabir, is anything coming to mind as we speak?
Yeah, we know, and I think Tobias has briefly touched on this, and how the industry's changed and would kind of look very different to when he would have started researching these things. What were some of the biggest challenges that you went through back when you were a master's PhD student, when you were proposing these things, when you were doing the research?
Yeah, so the main problem was still the idea how to identify professional teams. So for sure, we had teams like SK Gaming who developed into something super professional. But at that time, you were not able to see, okay, is that now a professional team, or is that just 5 kids who are just seemingly amazing in playing the games? So it's quite interesting to observe that you saw teams like TAM, which was one of the biggest Counter-Strike team in Germany for a long time. In retrospective, they were able to code a config really, really well. So some of them you could call cheater nowadays. But it was a different time. We didn't have this regulation, those rules, those settings, even the idea ESL. They did professional work back there, but it was like some back room in some weird location where you normally wouldn't go into it, but it was cheap and it was possible. So it was really difficult to say, okay, who should I talk with, and who are the thought leaders, who are the people who are bringing esports forward. And you see it with so many organizations back then. CPL did a super job at the beginning, but their CEO at some point focused on different topics, and suddenly that project was gone. Think about the World Cyber Games, a wonderful, super project, and still one of the cases where I say corporate social responsibility to the fullest, where Samsung paid everything. And amazing with the idea, if we think about IOC and all, a corporate paid Olympic championship out of their pockets with national qualifiers and all that. But when the crisis hit and they said, okay, we move to the mobile environment, they just shut it down. And that was something where there was less stability than even today. And that made it really difficult, as you didn't know where it is moving. So nowadays, you have a feeling where it goes. Back then, it could be gone tomorrow.
When you say CDL, I think you mentioned, when you say they were doing a good job, in what ways would you say they were doing a good job? What do you think about?
Yeah, they had this idea of like the World Tour, CPL World Tour, which was at that time, think about it, a prize pool of 1 million. So the winner got $1 million US. And the idea was that the fight, it was I think the game was called Painkiller, that they are playing the finals on the Great Wall, on a Chinese Great Wall. In the end, I think they didn't do it because was not able, but they had this really great idea, which is nowadays this IEM Grand Championship circle, where if you win 3 of them, you become the greatest of the greatest, like Navi received. So they already had all of those ideas and showed where esports is going, like the CPL spots, where they said, okay, we have one. They had a CPL Brazil. So in 2004, they had a CPL Brazil. And nowadays, people are saying, oh my God, we discovered Brazil. And we knew 2004 that Brazilian Counter-Strike players are good. And that is the part where they were able to see, okay, we have to go there. We have to go there. There are the people, and they did some countries that were not on the radar. So they did some really great stuff. But yeah, in the end, it was mostly about this one person. But he also mentored so many people who later on went to so many different other teams and organizations.
Mm-hmm. Sensational. I mean, I don't want to advance the conversation too quickly, because I think, the way you've looked at the history of esports, quick shout out to your book, Esports as Business. There's a nice, concise summary of the history of esports in there. I mean, you've spent significant time thinking about how esports has evolved over the last probably now 20 years. One of your early papers, I think you wrote a paper on talent management in 2012. I mean, that's very early when we think that, you know, the boom in esports research is probably the last 5 years, you know, since 2017. Perhaps we've seen most sort of obviously a peak in papers, but in 2012, there was probably very, very little. So even to publish those ideas back then, I think is extraordinary. How much were you aware of like the sort of global scene back then?
Yeah, so the interesting part is that esports always was global.
Right.
So that's something where it was just more difficult. If I think about, I had a student colleague who played with MTW, one of the big organizations back then. So I knew he was going to South Korea, he was going to Dallas and all. But it was not like, okay, I turn on Twitch and there it is. It was super hard to even get there. And I was blessed as well, being as a journalist, going to the WCG in San Francisco in 2004, which is still one of the best moments I had. But it's something where you always knew, and that's probably the European perspective as well. It always was international. And this was something where you early realized, okay, this is this thing we call internet. This is this thing we call Europe at the same time, where you played with French people, you played with Italian, you played with Swedish people. And it always was this idea where you knew we are international. And that is the part where I always was fascinated by esports, where, first of all, it's a digital first phenomenon. We rarely have that, where you say, okay, because of this PC or this device, there is something. And this is video games and this is esports. And also the idea, what are borders? We don't care about borders. It was really freeing aspect. And that's the part where I always knew wherever esports is going, I don't know, but esports is growing and it will always grow. We don't know if Counter-Strike will be around, but in the end, maybe thousands of different games will be popular. But at some point, everybody will play esports. And that's the part where probably it drives me a bit, where this is it. This is the next big thing. At some point, this will be the next big thing.
Inspiring. I mean, you can't listen to you talk about it without like hearing your passion for it as well. I remember, like, actually, I don't know where you wrote it, but the esports is digital, global, and something else. But the whole idea was the inverse between esports and sport. How, you know, esports is born digital, born global, maybe agile, trying to get local, perhaps. But then you've got sport clubs who are often predominantly local and not digital and not online, and they're sort of fighting to get online nowadays, you know, trying to promote their brand and things like that. That was always something that stuck with me. So, yeah, thanks for giving me that line. Yeah. Kabir, anything to check in with?
Yeah, no, I'm just fascinated by listening to Tobias talk. Sorry, just kind of taking my breath away a little bit. It's really interesting to hear, because not to call you guys old, but I'm obviously on a slightly bit of the younger side. So 2008, 2009 for me, esports is very much get your friends around, split screen, no one look on my side of the screen, everyone get the cardboard boxes out. But now it's absolutely insane, right? You can just log onto your PC, fire up League of Legends, CSGO, Valorant, and I could be playing with someone from Thailand, I could be playing with someone from Germany, I could be playing with someone from the UK. And we've seen that like little change in the world, where now people have their real life friends, the people they see in person, but now the people who interact with esports like on a frequent basis, they have their internet friends. They have these Discord communities, and it's so cool to see how through the technology and through how society has been shaped a little bit, even with the help of COVID, we now have these people that we can talk to all around the world. And hearing how Tobias has been there from the start, where people could only do it at such a small frequency. And if you wanted to watch it, you had to be at the event. You had to go to the LANs. You had to go to all these like small dream hacks or whatever the event was called. But now you can just fire up Twitch and you can watch the VCT challenges that just happened last weekend. You have LEC on LCS, all the other big names. So it's really cool to see. And I guess one of the big questions for you here is, where do you see it go next?
Yeah, so as you were saying, technology is always the driver for change in esports. If you think about how old monitors looked like, I still don't know how we transported them, being little weaklings and all. But it's the part where technology always drives esports. And I see a lot of change with mobile esports. Not only... It's crazy how much you can do with a modern smartphone nowadays and what you can play on it. But it's also the idea that the smartphone is the one thing every country has nowadays in common. And we see countries and even continents, so whole Africa will be mobile first. Why should they buy a PC? I mean, Kabir, you're more the younger generation. It's something where if I look at my students, they are writing their essays on a smartphone, where I take half an hour to write and reply on it. So just from the speed and all, it's something where this mobile esports will be so interesting to see. And again, Brazil is showing with Garena Free Fire how much potential there is. I think it is in India big as well, where we see this new culture emerging, where suddenly Counter-Strike and League of Legends are more for the older generation. So Wild Rift is more interesting, and Clash Royale and all of them, they have the numbers nowadays that compete with the big tournaments. Maybe not with Worlds, but all the semi-professional parts. And that's the part where I see so much growth. VR, I'm still skeptical about it. Could be me because I get motion sickness of it. It's terrible. Last week, I tried it again, and a really great game. Don't get me wrong, but 2 hours later, I still had a headache. And that's the part where I'm still skeptical, and it's expensive. So smartphone is something where everybody needs it. Everybody has to have it. So if we want to see the world to become closer, we will give developing countries smartphones. And that's the part where suddenly all of them have access, and that will be really interesting. To see how much impact it will have, and Africa will be interesting. So I'm looking forward to the first Nigerian world champion in Wild Rift or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, I think just to touch on that point, it's really interesting to see how each generation has adopted a different method or means of gaming. We had the split screen, the console gaming back in the 90s, the early 2000s. Then it moved on to that PC master race between 2005 to like kind of now, the prime specimen of gamers. and now, like I visit, I'm an only child, unfortunately, but when I visit my extended family, my cousin brother, he's 15 now. He's taken after me, and I'm sort of called like the bad influence, but he loves gaming now. But he started his own YouTube channel where he plays World Rift, and like he's made commentaries, and it's so interesting to see that everyone's doing the same thing. It's just the vehicle they're using to interact with these esports is ever changing. And like even with the Olympics now, I know it's a bit of a little controversial topic at the moment within the whole esports ecosystem, but they're adopting the whole smartphones. They're bringing that in because it's a bit more universal. So it's really interesting to see the various methods that esports can organically evolve from here on out.
Yeah, part of me feels like I'm going backwards. I picked up a few Nintendo 64 games yesterday. Just I don't know, just for like nostalgic reasons. But personally, I reckon the Olympics should start with an N64 and then work from there. They should repeat history from the beginning. Anyway, not a hot take. So I'd like to maybe let's go back to, you mentioned that your bachelor thesis, I think, Tobias, was about cultural diversity.
Master thesis, yeah.
Master thesis. Now, I really would like to, I personally would like to get better at this, understanding this topic, because I think your two specializations would be human resource management in esports, and cultural diversity. Now, my understanding of those both those concepts, both those ideas is very limited, but I'm increasingly seeing the importance of them. So, for example, my colleagues and I, we've done some work with organizations, so big esports orgs, where we work with multiple staff members, so team staff members, coaches and managers. And there's this idea that coming together, there is some benefit to coming together, sharing experiences, sharing ideas, sharing different perspectives within the org, even if you're not from the same game as the other person that you might be talking to. It's kind of this idea that having diversity within a culture is useful, but am I anywhere near being on track with ideas about cultural diversity? And is it bigger than that? And please correct me and put me on track if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So in general, there's a relatively rough general rule. If you have diversity, you are more innovative. So right. More diversity leads to more innovation. Less diversity leads to more the idea, okay, you are more pragmatic, you are doing certain tasks, you are more mechanic in that sense. So that's the part where most of the literature says, okay, for the accounting department, I don't care about diversity. If you're a German company, just get Germans. So really rough, stereotypical, but the idea is that team needs to do the accounting, that needs to do the tax report. But if you're thinking about innovation, new ideas, new concepts, that is something where the more diversity you have, the more ideas are coming into it. Because that's the part where overall intercultural management is a lot about stereotypes. That is a huge issue because it's oversimplifying, especially in a globalized world where, yeah, I live in Germany, but I have an Austrian passport. What does that mean? So your background story comes into it. But the whole time you are growing up, that has an impact. So if you're growing up in India, if you're growing up in England, if you're growing up in Germany, that has a fundamental impact on you, how your brain is working, how you are seeing the world. The one example I always take is think about being on time for an appointment. In Germany, it's like you have to be on time. Where are you if you're 5 minutes late? If you're more in the southern hemisphere, roughly half an hour late, that's okay. And that is something on this simple task and this simple topic, you're already generating a lot of conflict because both sides don't see it as a problem. They don't see it, this is a problem, because this is something they know. If you say we meet at 5:30, we meet at 5:30. In Colombia, it's 5:30-ish, could be 6:30 as well. I would go crazy at that point. So that's the part where this cultural understanding is hugely important because you understand why the person is ticking that way. And you see it with so many different ways in different countries. The same for if you look at the USA. They look like cowboys for us here. We are the greatest nation and all. But it makes sense if you look how they grow up. They are the greatest nation at the moment. So next generation will be, okay, maybe we have to debate about that. China is good as well. But they were, especially after the 90s, there was nothing else. So everybody who was a teenager in the 90s, yes, he or she believes they are the greatest. And they are technically right. And that's a part about this cultural diversity where it's hugely helpful to create new ideas, out of the box thinking, especially if you look at League of Legends. It's crazy to see what's happening in the LCK, what's happening in China, what's happening in Europe, what's happening in the US, that at some point, especially at the beginning, there are 4 metas. And I love this idea where 4 metas are there and nobody knows which one is the best. Theoretically, it could be even the US, even though they are not good in executing it. But that's the part where you see this cultural diversity is helpful. But it's something where if you look at a team level, and that from my experience with Counter-Strike teams, and also League of Legends teams, they don't look at that. They don't look at, oh, I have someone from Serbia, I have someone from France, someone from US, someone from South Korea, and someone from Germany. They only look at the skill level. And not only the potential is lost, but also the idea this conflict will emerge at some point. And we see it so many times. If you look at team vitality, having scouted or got the best team ever together. But yeah, it was clear that self-made and perks will not work together well. So from the outside perspective, so why is nobody thinking about that? And that's the part where it's quite interesting to observe that there is only one coach who even talked about that and approached me on that topic. And he has a management background. So he saw, I have this young, I don't know where it was, but he had a young player from one country and for Counter-Strike, an older one. So I think the one was 17 and the other was 27 and 2 different countries. And he asked, am I wrong to treat them differently? Because nobody is doing that. And I was saying, no, you are doing everything right. And his team is now going up more and more. And it's quite fascinating to observe that this is the competitive advantage he has for every other team.
So what's the process then? Like, how do you, it's not something that you, presumably it's not something you just go out and you just try and get a mix of people. It sounds like it's more sophisticated than that. It's you have 5 different nationalities on your team. What do you do to make that an advantage and avoid that conflict you speak about?
Yeah, so that's the part where you always at first have to look at what stereotypes there are. So for example, there's this idea of there are individualistic countries and collectivistic countries. So the idea that you as a person are more important than society, or society is more important than you. Something where you can see China as being a more communist-driven country. They are more collectivistic. But if you look at Scandinavian countries, it's more about the individualism, that everybody has good environment. And that's the part where you see at something like that, that this isn't already a certain mindset you have. And this is something where there's this concept of cultural distance. So how far away are those people? So having a Swedish player and a Chinese player growing up in Sweden and China and only knowing that, this will be definitely conflict because they have no understanding what the other side is even doing. And that's the part where just at the beginning, okay, what nationality are there? What do we know there? There is Hofstede, who created national dimensions. They are not perfect, but they are helpful to give you a certain feeling. But that's the part where you think about, okay, some form of synergy needs to be there. Some fit needs to be there so that they can talk with each other. But that's also a part where talking with those players, the great part about esports players are that they know they are international. So that's something where cultural intelligence comes into it. So if you think about it, they know how a French player is ticking, because half of the time they are with French on a server and they play with them. So they get a certain feeling about that those players are different. And that's the interesting part where I definitely need to do at some point more research on that. If esports players are more cultural intelligent, from my idea, I would say definitely European parts. They know they are European. Chinese, South Korean, probably not, because they're only playing together. And even the US ones may not be that great, because all the European players that go there adapt towards the US. And it's also quite interesting to observe that a player like Hansama suddenly was American. He looked like an American. He played like an American. He was like an American. He was not happy about that. That's why he returned, but he adapted to it. And I found that fascinating with so many European players going there. Jensen, great example. He nowadays looks like, he acts like an American. That's a term we also have, cultural chameleon. They moved and transferred their identity towards the US.
It sounds, in a sense, it sounds so counterintuitive, because like you always hear, like, I guess the phrase we hear the most is getting on the same page. And that's, I think, that has become so part of the fabric of building a team in esports that it's hard to separate it. But I feel like most people, when they're building a team, are striving to get everyone on the same page. But that could probably exist alongside these ideas, where we're not losing what makes us individuals, but we're integrating.
Absolutely. And that's the part where this mindset has to change, because in the end, the crazy part about esports is that the same page is, we have to destroy this nexus. It's simple as that. We have to win 16 rounds. It's simple like that. We have to, in Valorant, it's different number, but also the same logic. So the goal is always the same. And if you look at so many teams, if you look at Fnatic's goal is in League of Legends to win the Worlds. They are terrible at that at the moment. And I think they lost yesterday. So still terrible at that. But all of those teams know exactly what they want to achieve. And it's quite interesting to see that this is, somewhat disabling them to see it like that. Okay, the path can be completely different. And the path could be completely on the idea, okay, we need to create some synergy. That's why I love this word. Synergy also means like the idea, I have to understand what the weaknesses of my players are. And I find this cognitive dissonance super fascinating, because that's what we do in a draft. That's exactly what we do in the draft. If someone is picking Yuumi, you know what her weaknesses and her strengths are. So you pick, I don't know what now in the meta is good against Yuumi, but you pick someone else. And you could just transfer this idea to the players. So you know how Mickey plays, you know how Hylissang plays, you know how Kaiser plays. I'm only listening support players because I'm a support player, but you see how they play. Those three are like the idea, okay, let's go in there, have a fiesta, super aggressive and all. But there are others who are more passive. And a good example is, why do you pair Reckless with a Hilly, Reckless with a Mickey? Still something I don't understand from G2 Esports. Why did you get Reckless? If Reckless said, I have problems playing with Hilly, and Hilly and Mickey are like I mean, from their play style, they are twins in a certain sense. So what magic should happen that suddenly Reckless can play with Mickey? And that's the part which I find always fascinating, where it's always about this, get on the same page, but the path to the same page could be completely different.
An interesting question actually stems from this conversation when you bring in this Reckless to G2 move is, and I guess this is not just a question that is a problem in esports, it's the problem of the whole sporting industry in itself, given it's so outcome oriented. Do you feel that organizations are jump the gun too quickly when they try to change some of these pieces, either in the coaching positions, in management, or in the players? Because from the way I see it is, every time you change one of these pieces of the puzzle, you're changing that cultural value, you're changing that, and it takes longer to embed these things. And I'd really like to understand how you view this.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we currently have, especially with League of Legends, where like I think all teams traded like more 3 players from their whole squad in the winter split. That is stupid, to say it simply. That has nothing to do with sustainability or on an economical perspective or any perspective. And if you think about the good example is Rocket, Rogue, Koi.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the name changed always, but the general manager was always the same. The environment was always the same. And they also said, okay, let's get some freshmen, some talents, some players into it and give them a chance. What happened? I think they played 0 wins and were last in their first season as Rogue.
Mm-hmm.
But then 2 splits later, they were at least the finals. That was against Mad Lions, I think. Yeah.
Finals last year, and then they won it. Then they won it in their second finals appearance last year.
Yeah. So from being last to the finals to winning the tournament. And that's the part where you see, and after that, they only tweaked the squad. Mm-hmm. It's still similar. So that's some team where you see there is an idea behind it, how to keep the team together. And that's the part where, even from an economical perspective, it doesn't make sense, because you have to kick that person, pay something, or even bench them, like upset for a season. Yeah, I know being on the bench is not a lot of money for a salary, but it's still money. And we talk about esports teams that don't make a lot of money. So it doesn't make sense. And you see it with so many teams like Vitality. They don't find their zone. They're constantly shifting, they're constantly changing, and something you see with Fnatic. And if you look now at G2 and Mad Lions, you see that there is an idea behind it, that there is a strategy behind it. Mad Lions is like 5 people who have the same strategy, always go in there, have some fun, and they are like best buddies somewhat. G2 is like the idea, okay, we are crazy. That's their strategy, and that makes them unpredictable. But within their team, they know, okay, we give you space to be crazy, and we help you if it doesn't work out. So there is this space of, we allow you to be creative, but that could be a weakness. But if it is a weakness, the 4 other people helping each other. And that's the part where this constant changing of the squad, I mean, it's like everywhere. It doesn't help to create this. You have to create some form of trust, blind trust in that sense, especially in esports, where like in the end, it's milliseconds if you are stealing the Baron or not. The idea, okay, just try it. We see it a lot where the Baron Steel doesn't work and the other team rushes to the Nexus and GG. And that's the part where this trust is extremely necessary. And this can be done with a cultural diverse team. Definitely. It needs also a bit more time because you have to bridge this distance. But if it works out, you have this soul, this climate, this culture, where in the end, you don't have to talk a lot. I always find it fascinating how less a team that works well talks with each other. Where like, I know that Mickey is doing his stuff there, that other guys know what he's doing, and other teams are like constantly babbling, constantly, where I would say, okay, I mute all the other team members and that give me some rest. But that's the part where it's completely fascinating how teams are neglecting it. And that is in the end, super toxic.
Yeah. It's a funny, almost a bit of a caveat to cultural diversity, isn't it? Because it's not, it's like the rule should be cultural diversity with a bit of patience. Because you could say if you change your roster every split, you've got diversity there. Like you've got a lot of different characters in play, but you need time to develop, as you say, trust, understanding, coordination. And Kabir, that's kind of your wheelhouse, like the whole team coordination, how players learn to operate alongside each other. Absolutely fascinating. And I really thanks for sort of breaking that down, because I think it's always been intuitive to me that if you get people from different backgrounds and different biographies and give them space to share opinions and insights, you're more likely to come up with solutions or at least different perspectives, so that if you're not going to adopt them, at least strengthen what you're doing. It's exactly, I mean, you see it in sport coaching. If you go on a sort of coaching course just to reinforce what you already know, you get very little from it. If you can go onto a course and exchange with other coaches and have those informal learning experiences where you might think, someone else has approached this problem differently, that's a strength. So I think it's fascinating to talk about this kind of topic. Anything come to mind there for you, Kabir?
Yeah, actually, just to add on to some of the points made by Tobias here, I was watching the Euphoria podcast a couple of weeks ago, and they had Hansam and Mickey, and one of the biggest points they talked about was that training environment, right? And in esports, we see two sort of main methods for the professional teams. You have that office setting where teams kind of treat it as like a 9-to-5 job. They come in, they do their scrims, they do the review, and then they separate their own ways. And then you have the gaming house, the OG method where the players live together. And what was really fascinating for me to hear is Hans Sama talked about his experiences and when he was out in America with Team Liquid, and how the players that preferred to have that office environment where he himself as a player enjoyed having the players around and being able to talk to his teammates as just people. Like now there's this big GT meme is, if you want to be a player at GTU, you have to watch anime a lot. And I think, is that something from more of a performance of a coaching standpoint that is promoted, finding these outside of game moments where you can get the team to spend time together? Is that something that you believe is something that will strengthen performance?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something where if you're talking about a cultural diverse environment, you also have to have something connecting. So that's the part where if you look at this office or gaming house idea, office idea can work, definitely. But it's something where it needs to be done by all of the 5 players. So I could not live in a gaming house. That idea doesn't work for me. So that's a part where it works with this G2 squad. And if they're saying, okay, we are big anime fans, let's do that. And that's a part you also see in some companies. So I heard that recently that one team has their own book series. So the idea that they have one book series where they're looking forward that this author is writing something. And everybody's reading that when it comes out. And then they talk about that. This is a connector which helps them to find some, in all the differences, something connecting. And this can be anything. And therefore, this example with anime is really great because it's something where, something from One Piece comes out, something from Attack on Titan comes out and all, which helps them to be together. And that's also something where the coaches need to think about it, to the idea that, and that's something even HR is not talking about, but if you find something like that, like anime, and you're saying, okay, there is this new anime series of favorite series of your team comes out. Okay, let's schedule the cinema room and watch it together proactively as a coach, where you're saying, okay, no training at that time. We are watching that. I know how important it is to you. Let's do it that way. It's something where so many people are not thinking about that. So I don't know if G2 is thinking about that, but if I would be the coach from them, I would have a schedule somewhere where, okay, that's what they're always watching. Okay, something new is coming. Let's do something.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I believe the rule with G2 is, I think the players made this rule amongst themselves, is if they do well in their scrim training the day before, they can watch anime in the afternoon. It's kind of like a reward system for good practice and keeping that practice environment to high quality. So I think it's super interesting to see how teams can be so diverse and people have their own hobbies outside of the game. But if you can find that 1-2 things that let them sit together, because I know so many times I've just been sat in a room with my friends, either working on like a university project or something like that, and we're doing something completely different. But then we start talking about this university project and it becomes such a productive conversation out of just idle conversation. I think teams can really take huge advantage of those moments.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It makes me think of, I read a bit of literature around work groups and how, sometimes if you work for example, a university and you're in an academic department and the head of department starts referring to everyone as a team, but no one actually needs each other to do their jobs or, just like progress their careers, it's kind of a bit redundant. Like it doesn't really achieve anything. And, the department head might want everyone to bond and come together and stuff like that. But if they don't rely on each other for their jobs, they don't need each other for their jobs, it's kind of artificial. But I suppose in the esports team, you have that united goal, presumably that everyone wants to achieve that same end point, that big win or that, that qualification for the next round. Yeah, it's fascinating to think about. You did touch on the magic words, though, HR, Tobias. So this is kind of like a segue into the other bit that I want to learn about, which is human resources. And I think your area is more specifically human resource management and how that is maybe underutilized in esports and could be done better. I'm way back at the beginning, even trying to understand, what is human resources really? Rather, it's not just having a department in your org that takes care of some of the paperwork. It's more than that. And I'd love to touch or drill into that a little bit. Like, what really is it, and why is it good, bad, or underdeveloped and in need of development in esports?
Yeah, so in general, you can say about human resource, it's all the people stuff that happens in an organization. That can range from the legal part of writing a contract to the idea of paychecks and all. But it's also the idea of leadership as well, where how do we interact with each other? How do we deal with each other? And that's something where if you look at esports organizations, they rarely have a HR department, a dedicated HR department. And even then, if they have it, it's not always professional. But it's a part where often it's like this, okay, if you look at teams, we have literature on virtual teams. We have literature on mixed teams. We have all this knowledge in HR, how to create the best team, how to talk about high performance teams. And if you talk about, with teams about that, and you say, hey, let's do that. And the answer is, yeah, but I have a sports coach. Which is great to have a sports coach. But it's also this diversity idea where we have in esports, we are still struggling with the idea, is esports sports? I mean, Matt, you wrote a paper on esports coaching and also say, okay, esports coaching is a bit different. It's not entirely sports coaching. It has some other facets. And that's a part where HR could be something where, okay, maybe those facets could be from that perspective. And that's the interesting part, which I find fascinating, where, for example, the whole discussion about, male and women teams, where like in HR, get mixed teams. Point. There is no discussion about that. They say mixed teams are better because they use the strengths of different gender and what they can put into the team. And we are not even discussing, so we are saying always men and women are similar in esports. There is no difference. That is probably the case. But what women can bring into a team? I have no idea. Probably something good, something interesting. Maybe women can be more like through their empathetic, they are more empathetic. Maybe that can be helpful in conflicts. And that's something where we have to go away from this idea where we say, okay, yes, they should be on the same level. So they need to be the best at the best. But if you look at Counter-Strike, the in-game leader is always the worst scorer because he is thinking thousands of stuff at the moment. But I have no idea if a women in-game leader is better fitted for that. Maybe she would do 5 more kills, even though she's still worse than the top fragger. And let's be honest, a 17-year-old boy who lived on a Counter-Strike server will always be better, because at the same time, a girl is more intelligent to waste her time on a server. So it's also the case where it makes all sense in that way. But it's something where HR is saying, okay, we have to think about the strengths and the weaknesses and find a team that fits the best. And it's something where we have so many stories in HR where from all the key performance indicators that one person should be fired. But that person has this spillover effect to all the others. You don't see what that person is doing on any numbers, but you know, if you remove that person, you can also quit the team, because maybe all of the other team members will quit, but he or she was the glue of the team. And that's the part where we are currently looking too much into performance, where we're constantly seeing, okay, that KDA is better 5% than the other person, and so we hire that person, which doesn't make any sense. And that's a part where, where HR would say, let's go try mixed teams. What's the worst thing that can happen? We don't win. That could also happen with the other team.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there are so many examples of that in high-performance sport that you could name. I mean, just the idea of having a talisman, like a player, an iconic player that brings everyone together, even like a veteran player whose statistics might not be that great, but just the impact, the calming effect, whatever you want to call it, like the presence that player has on the others. intangibles, I suppose some people might refer to it as. Certainly. So I also think, so an HR approach, if you're looking at a team, would be, we don't all want to be exactly the same necessarily. In fact, that's kind of counterintuitive because we all play different roles. All the roles have different responsibilities, and we need to figure out what's the best sort of fit from at multiple different levels: personality, skill, all sorts of abilities, that kind of thing. That's like the HR approach, roughly. Is that about right?
Yeah, absolutely. Where in the sense, you're not looking at 5 players, but as you're saying, the goal and the sum, where this could be a lot more, where you could say, okay, you have a weak player, but as you're saying, the talisman, the calming person who's calming everybody down, which is could also mean that person is not contributing anything. But if that person is able to, I don't know, to calm down self-made, for example, which is still one of the biggest talents we have, but he is not able to transfer it onto the Nexus and onto the Rift, and that's the interesting part. What if we have a person that is able to give self-made that what he is missing? I would assume that is more than enough to outweigh that person is not good. And that's something we rarely discuss, where the idea, especially if you look at the bot lane, where you always have those 2 players, which should be more about the empowerment idea. How can the support player, it's in the name, how can the support player empower that other person? And we see it with some players who are not empowering maybe the bot lane, but running around everywhere and empowering suddenly everybody, which is quite fascinating to observe. And I think, and that's the interesting part, right, build this idea into the game with Yuumi. I know everybody hates Yuumi, but it's a perfect example what a player could contribute to the team, even though the player is not contributing to the game. And that's the part, if we get this Yuumi metaphor into the team fit idea, that could be quite fascinating to show, because in the end, it doesn't matter what the players individually do if the team wins. And again, as you're saying, getting everybody on the same page, but somehow we are talking about the individual performances. I mean, in the end, if you win, you win. It's like in football. If you score 1 more goal, nobody cares. Even if it's for free or 1-0, nobody cares about it. And that's the part which we also have to translate into esports more, that and that's something you see in football a lot, where some of those coaches who are dumped into the team like in mid-season, where they can do any transfers, at least the good coaches say, okay, what do I have there? Okay, I have super defenders. I have this one super goalie, but at the front, everything is terrible. So for sure, you are doing a defensive strategy. And that's the same for esports teams, where I really like how Mad Lions put their team together, even though at the beginning it didn't work out, but they are super offensive. So their strategy is super offensive. Yes, it's high risk, but you have super offensive players, but it doesn't work to say them, slow down. They would look at you and think, I don't know that word. And that's the part where this team fit also, where this culture leads to strategy in a certain way. And I rarely see that perspective. I see it more and more coming up, but it looked like most of the teams are still neglecting that.
Yeah. I've seen something maybe similar in terms of building the coaching stuff. I know Peter Dunn, when he was at Splice and Mad Lions a long time ago, he built this three coaches structure, and it was this head coach that had main oversight over strategy. You had the assistant coach who was the on stage leading scrims. You had a sort of a strategic coach. I think it was a positional coach type figure that would do a lot of one-to-ones and assist the assistant in a way. And I don't know if that idea was born out of, filling in for each other's strengths and weaknesses, but it's certainly like an idea that there's different functions can complement each other to produce a whole that is much, much bigger and better, rather than just having three characters that function in exactly the same way, doing the same things. Which is,
absolutely. Yeah. And especially if you look at coaching staff, I mean, I don't need to tell you or your audience, there's so much stuff a coach can do, but shouldn't do everything. Right. So it's, again, the idea of, having three coaches or maybe even more. Could be interesting to find the right amount of coaches, but it's not one. And that's the part where you also think about, okay, what are your strengths? What are the other strengths? So maybe you have a more one-to-one performance coach in your team. Let that person do the talks. Maybe you have this giga brain strategic analyst coach. Let that person find a new strategy. And that's absolutely cool, because also like the HR perspective is, you will not find the all-rounder. You will not find the jack of all trades. I think that's the English translation. You will not find that. If you find that, keep that person for your eternal life and never let her or him go. But that's like a unicorn. So you always know you will not find the perfect fit. So you have to create an environment where, at least out of your 3 or 5 people, you find the perfect fit for your team that fulfills all the roles. And that's something where you see in coaching, okay, that person is ticking that box, that person is ticking that box, that person is ticking that box. Great. All boxes ticked.
Yeah. Is it harder to do this in esports though? Because if you're outside an organization, you're watching avatars on a screen. It might be harder to pick up some of the characteristics, like of course gameplay and how you could see how a support roaming across the map to support other players might be one of those kind of characters that might mix in well with your team. But if you think about sport, like when you're watching the game on a television or analyzing it, you can see some attributes. It's obvious, right? You can see the character or the player. You can see the player that's lost the ball at one end of the pitch, gives everything they've got to play a part in recovering the ball at the other end of the pitch. And you can maybe see some of the communication. You can see their interaction with coaching staff and teammates and picking people up. When the whistle's gone, there's been a foul, they're running over to pick them up. Is it harder to achieve this because so much of it is hidden behind, the gameplay?
Yeah, so I would not say it's hidden behind the gameplay. It's hidden behind the publisher, to be honest.
Right.
Because theoretically, it's like the opposite. You have all the data, you have all the communications, and you have everything digital. So give it to a data analyst, and that person will be the happiest person in all of its career, because that's it. The issue is we are not able to look at that. Be it from the idea that the publisher doesn't want to share it. There are certain publishers who are already gatekeeping at that time, or you have teams that are gatekeeping it because they think some strategy can be leaked. But we know how academia is working. So if you give me the data set of this last weekend of the LEC and their voice communications, yeah, I would be gone for a month and maybe submit it, and then you see the results in 2 years, something around that. So no issue there as well. So that's still something where our communication needs to bridge those gatekeepers, because in the end, you see how players act in video games. I would even say more than in a sports field, because also the sports field is a theatric. So you see it like, oh, that referee is. So you tell your players, shut your mouths or babble more or something like that, where you are influencing them. A great example for me is if you look at assessment centers. I don't know if you did assessment centers in your career, but they are like theater. It's like the idea that those who create the assessment center read a book, and those who attend this assessment center read the same book. So it's like dating, both sides play, and at the end, where you're going into the next level, you realize that person is completely different. A great example is some companies are using it, Among Us, where you are trying to convince people, lie, and all of that stuff. You see quite easily who is comfortable with doing that, and people who are not comfortable with that. And if someone is saying, okay, I'm a great communicator, I can convince people, let them play Among Us. And so for me, I would play Among Us as an assessment center to find a lawyer. If that person is good as a lawyer, that person will win it. So I played with lawyers, and yeah, I played with Nepomuk Nothelfer.
Right.
He was amazing, and I know him really, really well. I was sitting there. Oh my God.
He's good.
He's good. And at the same time, I hate Among Us, because I'm really focused on the tasks, and I want to do the task. And I'm so in the mode and the flow where like I'm doing this weird part where you're putting the strings together. And people were asking, didn't you see the corpse there? Like, what corpse? What? Oh, you are the imposter. What's happening here?
leave me be. I'm doing my
I just
task.
want to do that. And that was like a mind-blowing moment for me. And at that moment, I also saw like, okay, you see that a player is choosing a certain role because he or she is more tend to it or like it more. I saw it with Overwatch as well. And actually, I had a student who did that, finding out who is the informal leader in a solo queue match. And she watched like 100 matches. And it was quite interesting that the informal leader, if there was this Reinhardt character, this huge knight soldier with a big shield and all, that person often was the leader of the solo queue match. Because, yes, I'm that person who is taking all the damage and pushes in front. DPS rarely was any support or leader. And it was quite interesting that, okay, you have this Reinhardt character, and then after that, the support players were the informal leaders because they were standing behind and were coordinating. And this is something where you see a lot about players is saying what's their favorite hero. So what's their one-trick pony, that sense. And that's super fascinating to observe. We need to do a lot more research on that because it's mostly the idea we know it as players, but we don't have the hard facts about that. But it's something where I would definitely say if you know about the game, you can say a lot about the player in game, especially in the critical moments. As I said with Hili-Zhang and Mickey, yes, they jump into it, and their heroes are often that they are able to jump into it. So for sure, they will probably play Yuumi, but they are not happy about that. They have other heroes they want to play.
Fantastic. Kabir, anything coming to mind here?
Honestly, I'm just surprised we made it through that hole without throwing out a Moneyball reference. There's just so many Moneyball references were coming through my head there.
Yeah, I mean, Moneyball is a different thing. For me, it's a completely different thing because you had this environment which was super static, which didn't evolve in any way. Baseball was just old school at that point. And if you look, this Moneyball principle was applied to football as well. FC Brentford and I think Copenhagen, I'm not entirely sure, but some Danish team. And the only thing we know about that, the Danish team won the championship. I mean, the Danish team won a championship. I mean, no hate against the Danish people, but your league is not that important. And Brentford is still in the second league. So it's also something where if you look at football, they already were some data-driven people in there. And I don't know if you have that phrase as well, but we have in Germany that phrase for some coaches, they are laptop coaches. So they only use their notebook and all. So they are there. But football showed that this is also an approach that can work, but you need this environment as well surrounding it. So they don't rely completely on it. And baseball went full mental into the Moneyball perspective. And the next season after that, New York Yankees won because they just put a couple of millions more into their sabermetrics. So that's a part where it leveled the playing field immediately.
It's also a question of interdependence, isn't it? So how much do you need your teammates to be able to perform? And baseball, I think, is like one end of the spectrum where you can just plug in someone who hits, who bats well, because they're kind of left alone to do that. Whereas in League of Legends, you can get someone with the highest KDA, if that's a stat you rely on, and plug them in with someone else. And on paper, like the numbers might suggest one thing, but like you say, Tobias, if they really dislike each other or they communicate terribly, or the human element, you have to interact everything through that lens, or put everything through that lens of the more you rely on your teammates to achieve your goal, the data needs to be taken with a pinch of salt, perhaps. I think that's kind of my stance on it so far. But like you say, lots of research to be done in all areas here. It's a classic one for esports. We need more research to understand it. Where would you go if you could? I mean, you're probably working on a number of papers at the moment. If there's anything you can talk about, please go for it. But like, where would you like the field to go of cultural diversity, human resource management in esports? And maybe before we get onto that, you recently, I think you recently interacted with a video online, or you tweeted about, I think, Team Liquid's approach to World of Warcraft and how they have a very sophisticated approach to bringing human resource management into World of Warcraft. So these are two things I know very little about, World of Warcraft being one, and I know a little bit more now, having spoken to you about human resource management. But are they a good example of this in esports, and how so?
Yeah, so World of Warcraft also comes from own experience being a raid leader as well, where I saw like the idea when I started, it was like 2005, 2006, around that. Relatively competitively, I would say that's the time where I peaked. Top 10 in Germany with a team, but it was something where you needed more players. So at that time, your raid consisted of 4 players. And it was a hobby. Back then, it definitely was a hobby. Nowadays, it's still, for some of them, a hobby. It's not something where you can make a living out of it, maybe with Twitch streaming and all. But Team Liquid will not pay enough for 25 players that they can live off it. So that's the part where you have this time management, which is super fascinating because you need to prepare. It's not like the idea you have your match time, but you have your preparation, you have your analytics afterwards, and all of that is mostly done with your team. So that's the part where it's all about you, and you have 25 players you have to manage. So it's like you are having a small and medium-sized enterprise. And when I was playing it, you had to manage 40 players, and our squad consisted of 60 players. So to rate every day. So that was a lot of organization, but also a lot of interpersonal interaction. So if you're saying to that player, you are not good enough, and that is something you have to say to 20 players at the same time, you are sitting there and maybe not giving your best because you have to do everything. It's a difficult discussion to say to your colleague, you are not good enough, but you are worse. So that is something which made me realize that I learned a lot about leadership at that point. And the interesting part about World of Warcraft is, first of all, this race to world first is done and organized by the players. So it's not like Blizzard is saying, hey, let's do it that way. For sure, Blizzard with its content has an impact on it, but they created something out of it. And the fascinating part about this was that most of the leadership members, or those who are the raid leaders, said at some point, we have enough technology. I can have 25 streams of my players. So I'm not playing anymore. I become the outside coach, raid leader, giving the input. And I have my coaching staff behind me. So you have suddenly 25 players, that one raid leader and a couple of other people that are outside. So their development is, yes, the best for the team is that I'm no longer playing. And that's something where thinking about that's a lot to do, or from personal perspective, where you're saying you are not good enough anymore. It's like in sports, same issue, but it's something where you suddenly have this orchestra role, where you have this guy with the, I don't know, thingies. Conductor. And suddenly you have in esports a conductor. And that fascinated me so much, where if you look at their how their environment is looking like, they have 4 or 5 monitors with all the information and all the input. And at the moment, something is changing. They're changing the strategy. They're changing, that is called weak auras. That's an add-on where you can put informations on the screen for your players. So something is happening, a big red button is emerging where do not do that, or something like that. And all of that is happening in real time. And you are like a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks together with this squad. So it's like this super high performance environment where everything is on overdrive. And that makes it super interesting to observe because it's super exhaustive. So we had this one race to world first where one of the teams, Team Liquid, actually, they quit. They said, my players are burnt out. They are no longer able to compete. We stop. And that is something which I still find super impressive, where you're saying, okay, we forfeit. I mean, how many times do you see that in esports or in traditional sports? In that you see, no, that's enough. My players cannot do anymore. It's not okay. Let's forfeit it. And quite interestingly, Team Liquid also said, yeah, it was the right decision. We fully stand behind you about that. But that's the part where this World of Warcraft environment is so super interesting, because it's challenging how we see teams and how important teams actually are, and that you need someone who is the conductor. And for sure, you cannot do it in games like Counter-Strike, where the coach is not able to communicate. In League of Legends, even worse. But the idea that this role as a leader doesn't mean you need to be the best, but it's the idea that you are empowering your team. You give them everything they need. In the back end, it's something where they also need to manage that they could get enough food, that they have breaks, and all of that. And suddenly this role of the raid leader is not about pushing buttons anymore, but empowerment. And that's the metaphor I find super interesting, because you see, if that player or that leader can do that, the team is competing really well. And that's the part where I really like this Team Liquid raid leader, Maximum, and Echo Guild leader, Scribe, who are completely different people. So Maximum, like this extrovert, maybe more swear words and all, and Scribe, this like introvert family father who's looking out for their players. And at the same time, they compete on the highest level. So they also show leadership is more about what are you comfortable about. Not like what most standard literature is saying, you need to be this extroverted, loud, whatever, this Elon Musk or whatever. But the idea, you need to be you. And that's something which I find fascinating, that this small game, it's not a big industry, it's not a big environment, there are not that many people who are watching it, but it shows so much how this new virtual leader could look like, where it's more about, I'm the leader, but I'm this servant leadership. So I help you and I talk with you. And that's something which I find fascinating.
100%. I mean, I think if you took a step back, you could see the coach as a conductor in some way. Not granted, they can't interact with the players during the game, but a sort of relying on or giving them space to be the experts, the players, that is, to be the experts, and learning how to bring them together, however that looks like bring them together so that their routines are on point, that they are understanding of each other's roles, they can put it together when it counts, they prepare as well as they need to, but you're leaving the performance to those players. But yeah, I mean, for those players that take a step back and say, like, my role here, my best fit, the way I best serve the team is as that conductive figure, like, you know, regardless of I take my own gameplay out of this, and we best serve the needs to sort of achieve success in this raid. Like, that's phenomenal. That's really interesting to think about. And I can't even imagine what we like to operate within a team that's 25 plus people. Like, I mean, there were some games we used to play at, like, summer camp, I think, that you have a big red ball, you kick it around campus, and there's like a pack of people chasing after it, but like there's no coordination there. There's no need to understand who's going on. The games are like 5 minutes max. So, you know, just organization on that level is quite kind of mind-blowing to think about. So yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. And that's the part where you see how much leadership there is necessary to, as you were saying, okay, calming down. So when I was a raid leader, yes, I did all that, but it's also like the idea, okay, let's breathe, let's calm down. I'm the one who's talking. And that's the part where even the way you're communicating. And I found it fascinating that, yes, I'm more the calm person, but we had a second grade leader who's more erupting. And even that was quite fascinating. He was a good raid leader in that sense, that he knew when he had to shut up. So then I got a message like, okay, I cannot talk anymore. It's now your raid.
Amazing. Yeah, authenticity, self-awareness. That sounds like a big piece here.
Yeah.
And also, you spoke about like having a second leader. I was going to ask, like, how do like leadership hierarchies form quite naturally, or is there a feeling that everyone's on the same level? Like, does that come out quite naturally in World of Warcraft?
Yeah, it comes quite naturally, because at least most of the teams are semi-pro. So you could only say that like 5 teams can be considered professional, which can be compared to the big teams. So even that, it's super small. So Echo Guild, Team Liquid, the World of Warcraft squad, they are their unique environment. So they don't have this complete support with a big coaching staff and all. That means you need to have a leader or more raid leaders, just for the idea that every time it could happen that, okay, I'm out. So they don't have contracts as well, like in traditional esports. So you always have to build up redundancy. So you're constantly also looking for new talents. Not only the idea of a new warlock or a new mage, but the idea, okay, who could lead something? And then you have those raids in the off season, where you give them the spotlight. So that's something where you have a rotating leadership system. Even the idea that some saying, okay, life is bigger at the moment. I have a kid now, or I have a new job, I have to move and all. But you have this redundancy, and you see it with the big teams as well, where yes, Scribe and Maximum, those are the big names, but they made a career out of it. So that's 2 people who made a career out of it. But if you look at other raid leaders, they're constantly changing.
Mm-hmm. Sensational. I've learned something, well, a whole list of things. It's been a while. This has been fascinating dive into these topics. I was going to go into future research. Before we do that though, Kabir, is there anything on your mind? Are you thinking up anything?
Just real quick, I think keep it as brief as possible, but I remember you mentioned at the very start of this conversation, big data. That's something that's taking over the world in both traditional sports and esports now. For the people who might not be as aware, what is it? Why is it so popular now? And is it always the most effective route for performance teams to rely on? I guess those are my 3 big questions around that.
Yeah, so big data co-aligns with the idea of the digitalization of the world. So we are just collecting more and more data about everything. Be it the idea, if you look at your smartphone, somewhere your smartphone provider or telecom provider is tracking your location, which can be used for certain analyses. And that's the part where we see this growth of data, which is exponentially growing. And that's the part where big data becomes interesting, because most of the statistic models just need a lot of data to have some reliable results out of it. But that's the part where there is this old concept in computer science: garbage in, garbage out. So that is the part which is mostly problematic, because it's so much data, we are not able to understand what's happening. We only find the correlations between something. And that leads to the idea that some people are finding correlations that are super weird. So my favorite spurious correlation is the number of movies of Nicolas Cage correlate with suicide deaths in swimming pools in Utah. Highly significant.
I can see the link. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We all see the link. But that's the part, yeah.
There's one about, I think, Harry Potter books being released and hospital admissions for kids or something. And if you put that into a statistics class, I think you can come up with some pretty wild claims that maybe bridge the gap there. But yeah.
But that's a part where we see a lot of correlations, but we often forget, it's not a causal effect. So it isn't the reason that more Harry Potter books come out and kids go into the hospital. Could be thousands of other reasons. And it's something where there's this wonderful book of Theodore Porter. It's called Trust in Numbers. So we love numbers. And if there is something significant, oh my God, we are so happy about that. So that's the part where big data gives you the illusion that we know something. But we don't know how the data is collected. We don't know what correlates with that. And that, if you look at performance, yes, we can now find performance indicators. And suddenly we find out that certain things are interesting. So there's this interesting, back in the 40s and 50s, interesting study called Hawthorne studies. They looked at the idea, if you change the light in a room of secretaries, are they more efficient or less efficient? And they found out something. But the interesting part was they were more efficient because people were talking with them. So it was not about the light, but they realized, luckily they realized, because that was one of the turning points in HR, because it was, if you talk with people, they feel confident about, they feel happy about it, that someone is looking at them. And out of that, they perform better. So that's the part where, yes, big data is amazing and it's so super interesting. And especially in esports, you have everything. But you always have to think about the human perspective in that. And that data can help you to find a link that you didn't look at it. But in the end, it's all about, again, it's all about the idea to talk with the people. And that's something data is not helping you in the end. It gives you indicators. It gives you a first idea. But the hard part is talking with the people and getting them together and let them feel appreciated.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think it's always, the number only tells you so much about a person, right? And it comes back to that whole, jumping back to that conversation when you're hiring a player just based on KDA. I think a motto that I live by in my coaching philosophy is, it is easier to train someone to be a good player than to be a good human. So it's always, you find the good humans, you can make them mechanically good. You can teach them more. You can always expand their game knowledge. But once someone builds that habit, once someone has that cultural view and they might not have that cultural intelligence, it's harder to instill those things because people, as humans, we have so much inertia to change that it becomes hard to break that mold, so to speak.
Yeah. I'm going to use some data now and say that we've just ticked over 2 hours on the recording. So probably a little bit less on the episode, but I think we should maybe try and conclude, as much as I feel like we could go on and on and on. Maybe try and summarize. Let's try and summarize where we're at. So Tobias, we've learned a little bit about your background and how, gaming and esports was ingrained from the first days of your studies, at least, master thesis there. You also had, you were on site at WCG, I think, in 2004 over in the States. So you've been around since like the very origins of what we could call esports, and you've been there and lived it, which is quite spectacular. You've certainly seen a change. You've published along the way. We all know that, and your contributions to esports have have been fantastic. Like your reading has really clarified my thoughts, as I've said. We touched on cultural diversity, about having the strength of considering where someone comes from and how that can be an asset or a new way of looking at a shared problem or a shared task. How diversity of opinions and experiences within a group, such as an esports team, can be an advantage. How it's not always easy to do that, perhaps. It's a process we have to work through. We looked at human resource management, what that is, some principles about it, and how bringing together a team that isn't just, being on the same page doesn't mean everyone is the same with the same skills, same abilities, the same thought process. Rather, it's the process of piecing together the team that best fits and complements each other. Complementarity is probably a word we didn't use, perhaps. It appears to be important there. We spoke about World of Warcraft, and I think this is something I need to sort of get a bit more into, because these huge teams and how leadership emerges from within, and players often see my role here isn't actually just playing and being the best player, but it's something else to complement the needs of the team. I think that's fascinating. Yeah, we didn't get into future research, which is perhaps the first time ever. Like normally it's a whole big chunk. I don't know. Is there anything, Tobias, that is pressing or urgent that you're really excited to get done in terms of research?
Yeah. So actually, on World of Warcraft.
Oh, excellent.
So I have a student assistant who is himself a raid leader, and we want to dig deeper and interview those raid leaders. So that's definitely something we want to do. Then this link idea of personality. Can you see some personality traits in the way a person is playing or choosing a hero? So that's something we want. And overall, my mission, or at least I think our mission, should be more in the idea that esports, yes, we look at esports, but esports is a metaphor for a bigger thing, for this digital society or something like that we have to focus on the social impact. So also like the idea, okay, like what you are doing with coaching, that's also like, okay, yes, we train the future coaches in high esports teams, but we also train coaches in schools, for example. What do they need? Kabir said, I think Kabir was it, with, in the end, the players know it better what they can do. But you, with the conductor idea, that this coach is the conductor, especially if you look at high school teams, university teams, and all of that. At least that's something I would like to contribute, maybe not write it, but having this discussion where that we have that esports coach, depending on their context, have a different role. Because especially in high school, I don't think that coach needs to tell them how a certain hero is working. It's actually a waste of time in that sense, but how to be a good human and be less toxic and all of that. And I think that's something where if we solve a topic like toxicity or a topic like gender diversity at that level, we can solve it everywhere. And if we solve it there, that would be a great win.
Fantastic. Excellent. All right. Well, I feel like we should conclude there for the moment. We can't, I suppose, tease out of you where the next Esports Research Network conference will be. I remember the teaser was outside of Europe, but I won't push for an answer on that one. But I think we're all anticipating another fantastic conference. Like
I don't have an answer at the moment.
Oh, okay. Right. Well, Belgium. I think you should go to Belgium.
I think India is a pretty good one. If I'm honest, it's so warm all the time. It's good feed, you know.
Excellent.
Sounds interesting.
Consider it. Okay, cool. Well, Tobias, thank you so much for your time. And Kabir, any concluding remarks? Otherwise, thank you for your time as well.
No, always a pleasure. I think I've learned so much, and I guess thank you, Tobias, for Esports Research Network, because without that, I wouldn't be sat here, and I wouldn't know Matt, I wouldn't know yourself, and I wouldn't have learned so much about cultural diversity.
Yeah, well said. Okay, everyone. Well, then, look forward to this podcast being out, and hopefully it'll be out soon. And I look forward to the reaction. And where can people sort of engage with you, Tobias, the best, if they have any questions to follow up?
Yeah, so I think on Twitter, that's always great. On LinkedIn also, or you join the ERN Discord. I live on Discord, so you probably reach me there easily. And yeah, again, thank you that you spent so much time with me. So
it was a joy, honestly. It was a pleasure. I've got a lot of notes to write up, reflections on this. So yeah, thank you for your time, and thanks everyone for tuning in and listening. And have a great week. Speak to you soon.